Hello, friends. Welcome to the School Transportation Nation podcast, brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software. I am your host, Tony Corpin, publisher and president of School Transportation News.
And I'm Ryan Gray, editor-in-chief at School Transportation News. Thanks for tuning in to episode number 6.
Well, friends, we have a great conversation planned for you today. Later on, we'll be joined by industry consultant Ryan Hahn, who will share what he's been seeing as school districts look into the future, what is changing because of the coronavirus. So, kids are getting back on the school bus. What's that look like, Ryan Gray? What are we doing out there?
A lot of planning, as you mentioned. Scenario planning is the phrase du jour across the industry. The crystal ball is still really murky. What we do know is that most states are ramping up to try and reopen in the coming weeks, certainly months. We saw just this week that Governor Gavin Newsom here in California shocked a lot of people. We wrote about it, actually. And he said that he really wants to see the new school year start early in July. So that opened up a lot of eyes, raised a lot of eyebrows. California Department of Education immediately responded. Tony Thurmond, who's the state school superintendent, said, well, basically, hold on a second. We need to follow safety protocols, listen to what our health experts are saying, and we need to have some strategy and plans in place to actually make this happen. So, of course, Governor Newsom didn't have any details. That's being left up to individual school districts here in California. They are the ones that have the ultimate decision power on when and how they will open up school. But still, California Department of Education is leading the charge and trying to provide guidance to them. So we're seeing this across the country. The different states are grouping together and initializing pacts or consortiums to help try to get each other all going in the same direction as much as possible. So again, a lot still needs to be figured out. And then that's what's frustrating a lot of people, of course. And we're getting continue to be getting a lot of questions from readers on what's next. What are districts doing? And the short answer is they're not really doing much in terms of concrete plans, like this is what we're going to do. They're still developing it. They're going through every conceivable possibility, as one student transporter told me, to try and build up contingencies for how they're going to tackle a host of issues. One of them being, how are you going to congregate kids at a school bus stop and adhere to social or physical distance requirements? Those aren't going to be going away. Then what happens when the kids get on the bus? Even before that, are we going to be screening kids for their temperatures? Kind of like what happens in some classrooms. My daughter, she goes to preschool, and every morning they have to have their temperature taken. That was even before COVID-19. Well, how are kids going to get on the school bus? What's the ramifications for special needs routes when you have monitors and you have to install or secure child safety restraint systems or secure wheelchairs? You got to be in close proximity with these kids. So just indicative of all of the asteroids flying at student transporters right now. And in addition to that, it's like this is all well said and well and good, but are we going to have enough school bus drivers when school buses magically start rolling again? So, that continues to be another theme that's affecting the industry. Really, the public school employees seem to be better off, generally speaking. Most school districts nationwide have continued to pay their employees, their staff, including school bus drivers and transportation staff, throughout these closures. Where we continue to see these folks really affected is on the contractor side. So we just saw this past week in Long Island, one of the largest school bus contractors there went out of business. They had temporarily laid off 900 school bus drivers, and that's not to mention all the dispatchers and routers and trainers and supervisors they have. But they had laid them off temporarily in April or in March, I believe. And just this past week, unfortunately, because they're still not getting paid by multiple contracts, by multiple school districts, they had to close down their doors. And that's been a big concern of the National School Transportation Association and executives at these school bus companies, large and small, is this are these closures and the lack of some districts paying, is that going to drive some companies out of business? And unfortunately, we've seen, at least one company that's happened to them. So still a lot of questions, a lot of concern, but we feel like we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like I said, a lot of states are moving forward with at least indicating that they're going to be reopening soon in some way, shape, or form, in phases, most likely. So while life is not returning to normal, it's that new normal at least is starting to come to fruition, and we'll know a lot more in the days and weeks ahead.
Well, Ryan, it's just funny to me that they came out and said school's going to start in July because clearly they think transportation is like a water faucet, right? You just turn it on and it starts flowing, like it doesn't take any prep work, right? And we all know that really is the case. So I think that's the tough part, right? It's how do school districts really treat transportation, right? Is it just, it's a function of moving kids from point A to point B, and that's what we're known for? And how does that change in the equation with a lot of the things you were just talking about, right? So I think that there is just a very clear disconnect on how transportation's role and how it's going to affect these schools as they start up, because not paying your people, like what we see on Long Island, are they expecting these contractors just go back to work whenever they see fit? It takes time to onboard people. It takes time to do those sorts of things, right? And you have to treat your people right. There's a lot of trust that's broken, I think, from that standpoint when you furlough people and then they let go. Where's their opportunity? They got to count on a consistent paycheck for their families to meet their obligations. And, if they're not getting that, they're going to go somewhere else, right? Clearly, there's other companies like Amazon, there's trucking, there's just so many different delivery type of companies. So it's really perplexing. I mean, why do you think, Ryan, there's just that disconnect? Why do they think transportation could just start up on a dime? Like, just flip the switch and the lights are on, transportation's going to roll. Like, why is that?
Well, first of all, this is nothing new, unfortunately. I think all of our readers and listeners will agree that student transportation for a long time now has been, I refer to it as, looked at as like the redheaded stepchild. And, no offense to all you redheads out there, or Ryan Hahn, our good friend who we're going to hear from in a couple of minutes. But, I jest, but really that's the rub here, is that transportation is viewed along the lines of food service. It's kind of like the lunch lady and the school bus drivers are down the rung on the district priority list. And that's really nothing new. And a lot of districts, I think they're starting to get it. And we talk to a lot of leaders in the industry and definitely some forward thinkers who embrace transportation and realize that function is vital to school district success, because you got to get kids to school. But unfortunately, when push comes to shove, like in this instance, we're seeing that the classroom is winning. We have school districts that are worried more about paying their coaches, making sure that they can have a football program in the fall, but not thinking about transportation. And we've talked about this, school attorneys are really chopping up language that's in both the CARES Act as well as these different executive orders put out on the state level that says to the greatest extent possible, continue to pay your contractors, continue to pay your transportation. And they're looking at that and going, oh, well, it's not possible. That's just a recommendation. It's not a mandate. So we're not going to pay. And one of the things that we're seeing additionally in schools districts not paying contractors is a lot have renegotiated. So they're paying now 80%, 70% of the original contract. They've renegotiated to remove fuel clauses because maybe those school buses aren't running or not running as many miles as they used to. So in essence, these contractors now are making less than what they've already budgeted for in terms of just employee salaries and all the different operating costs, because they still have these fixed costs, right? So a lot of student transporters who work for contractors, they're seeing their hours reduced. So I was talking with one student transporter this week, and she was telling me that their hours have been reduced from 38 a week to 20. And you look at what's available in unemployment, they could make more getting unemployment, but they're being told by the union, no, 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 the state doesn't want you guys to go on unemployment because, of course, there's 10 million other people that are on unemployment right now. So they're looking at it like, the state's looking at it like, oh, well, you guys are employed. Well, but you have, rent due, mortgage due, you have bills to pay, kids to feed, and that's just not cutting it. And as we've talked about time and time again, school bus drivers, when they're making between $15 and $20 an hour, but not being guaranteed a 40-hour week, how do you make a living on that? So really, it's just a continuation of the same old story that until transportation really gets its seat at the table, or at least, forces its way to the table, we're going to continue to see this happening. And what we do not want to see happen is school busing to fall by the wayside even further. It's now time for the industry to galvanize, put all differences aside. Everyone is in the same ballgame here, private and public sector alike. You have to advocate. You have to utilize your associations, get to your states, get to your legislative representatives, and demand that transportation be a part of the conversation. Share the data, share the value of school busing.
Ryan, those are really good thoughts. And I really see a lot of stories out there, really compelling stories about how, people are stepping up, how, school districts are paying their employees and, vendors too, right? I see a lot of suppliers that we work with, a lot of our partners that are pivoting. They're creating products that aren't core to their business, but they're doing what they have to do to survive. Or they're also, supplying products to the industry, like, PPE, masks, gloves, sanitizers, just things like that. And it's just a really good thing. And it gives you, just a thought to say, hey, you know what? Thank you to those suppliers that are making that effort to support the districts and the contractors that really need those supplies. And when you're prepping, technology is a big part of that. And I want to share a little bit, our partner TransFinder, who sponsors this podcast, they are really excited that they have new things to offer, and they're really pushing hard. And TransFinder is the leader in school bus routing software and logistics. They are all about being forward thinking. And that's what makes such a great team. Their new routing solution, Route Finder Plus, is out and it's getting rave reviews from their clients already. It's a web-based solution and is the most powerful routing tool on the market. You can learn more about it at transfinder.com. And speaking of being innovative, listen to this. TransFinder has thrown down a challenge to our School Transportation Nation listeners. If TransFinder gets 10 listeners to email TransFinder at getplus@transfinder.com and say that they are interested in doing a demo, TransFinder will donate $100 to our favorite charity of choice. We still got to pick a charity. I love MBX, which is my school district's charity to help students. But I really want to thank TransFinder for being so innovative and helping us kind of give back to the community. And, go on social media, shoot it out to your friends, pass it around. Word of mouth is great. The email again, getplus@transfinder.com. And make sure you make TransFinder put their money where their mouth is and get in there and get those donations for our charity. Really appreciate that. Coming up next, we have school bus industry consultant Ryan Hahn. You won't want to miss this.
All right, we're back. I'm here with Ryan Hahn, the smarter Ryan, if you will. He is going to talk to us about what he's seeing on the ground, because as a consultant, he's working with schools right now, fielding a lot of questions, working on plans. So Ryan, he comes from a family that bleeds yellow. His mother, Marcia, recently retired after 40 years in the industry. Talk about a trailblazer, being one of the first female directors of transportation in Washington State. So he was brought up with a love of school bus and knowing the intricacies of how it works. He started himself as a school bus driver at 20 years old, and he's now a consultant, as I mentioned, and he's based in Sonora, California. So Ryan, first of all, how is it up in Sonora today?
Hey, Ryan, it is beautiful. It's about 75 degrees, sunny. Couldn't ask for better weather today.
Wonderful. And I know that you're spending a lot of your time also in another great part of the state, San Diego. And down there, you're working with a school, private school, I believe it is, and they have a school bus fleet. What are they looking at? What are they looking at doing to try to get buses rolling again when school starts?
Well, we're busy planning, obviously, alternative scenarios like Tony talked about and you talked about earlier. But we're really focusing on, prioritizing resources, and the thought process for alternatives starts always with health and welfare of the driving staff, of the students that ride the bus. Makes a quick shift to then assessing liability. Moves on to safety needs. Keeping people safe is always a priority of transportation. And then, of course, when we're identifying alternatives, we're also looking at the viability, and the cost-benefit analysis on some of these alternatives is pretty substantial when we're looking at social distancing on the bus, limiting capacity, creating alternative schedules, limiting capacity on the buildings, meaning that we have to shift kids to school. I think transportation is at a point where it's generally just on. Transportation is like a utility. It's generally just on, and people expect it to be on. And people in this field are being pushed and pressed right now to be creative and come up with thoughtful ways without any rules. So there's not really much of a game plan right now. And there's a lot of really good energy going around the industry in terms of the what ifs. And I do know that I can share that in particular, next week, I'm meeting with some public health officials and district and school administrators to kind of talk about one option that I brought to the table is how do we effectively utilize the transportation department and its assets, its fleet of buses, to create a clean campus, so to speak. And so I'm excited to learn more about that, and I could talk more about that too later in the podcast if you'd like.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and follow up on that. So, yeah, we were talking about that a little bit, and you were talking about, how you envision the transportation utilizes its assets beyond just that home to school transportation. Because as you noted, we are seeing that most likely we're going to be seeing limited student transportation. Again, there still needs to be a lot figured out on this whole social distancing thing, and what does that mean to passenger capacity and school bus stops and this and that. But can you go ahead and talk a little bit more about utilizing transportation assets for total school health and safety?
Yes, Ryan. So the first thing that comes to my mind is how can you reutilize transportation assets to maintain a clean campus? So that starts the conversation of let's keep parents from coming on campus with their car, with passengers in their car, with animals in their car, to drop off kids. How do we create an environment that is away from the school to be able to effectively, when a plan is approved by public health officials, screen children to be able to say, okay, child A is ready to board the bus today and go to school. That's a completely different mindset than what we're used to, which is let's pull up to the bus stop. We know that we're going to have to probably social distance at the bus stop and limit capacity. So if we're going the other direction and we're thinking, okay, if public health officials approve a system that says, okay, you're okay with appropriate PPE and not taking your backpack or any other items with you from home, because you don't want those touching other students because the virus can live on those surfaces as well. Maybe we can put more students in a bus at that time. That starts the conversation of returning to that normal reality. That may be a conversation that moves into how we screen students to get in the building as well. But if we're utilizing the transportation assets to create staging areas off campus or another district or school property where people can meet us there, they go through the screening process, they get on the bus, and they're dropped off on campus, that works well for staff too. So it essentially creates an opportunity to reutilize those assets and create some sort of a screening process and procedure to keep everything you don't want on campus off of campus. Now, in terms of picking up students at bus stops and how that would play out, we've had conversations about staffing a staff member on the bus to go and help with that screening process before children board, helping hand out PPE if it's necessary. All of those kinds of scenarios are being talked about right now.
Okay. And we'll come back to a little bit more on the health screening, because I know that you have some interesting ideas or thoughts on that. But in terms of the districts or the schools that you're talking to, I know that one of the things, kind of a sneak peek for all our readers out there, you're going to be writing a column in our upcoming June issue, and you're going to be talking a little bit more about this. But first, want to capture some of your thoughts on what you're talking to schools about, what recommendations, how do they go about some of this scenario planning that they need to do? Do you have some recommendations that you want to share?
Sure. So it always helps to provide some guardrails or boundaries to the conversation. It can be so daunting for people to try to think and come up with alternatives outside of their normal wheelhouse without some sort of direction. And we're finally starting to get some of that direction from the governor in California about at least a school start date or an attempt to have a school start date. I know that several districts that I'm working with in California are like, we're not going back before our normal start. We're not going to be ready. We're not going to have things ready to go. So that's being talked about. But in terms of the actual planning process for scenarios, I think that it's probably a good practice to go ahead and pretend like you are planning for midday or half-day kindergarten all over again. Half your campus is going in the morning, half your campus is going in the afternoon. And that can help split up the use, reduce capacity on the bus and in the classroom. I know that kind of conversation has been going on. The other planning piece that people are talking about that I just haven't jumped on board yet is the whole social distancing conclusion on school buses. And you can plan and plan and plan, but the fact is the school bus is such a contained area without the presence of a proper air filtration system. The driver is never going to be able to be social distance away from the students that are boarding and deboarding. There's other ways you can plan that with loading and unloading procedures where students never walk past each other. But then you look at what's the viability of that even being possible with your current assets, with your current driver pool, with your current bus, how many buses you own. So it just becomes a circular conversation of let's talk about our what ifs, but we need a little bit more direction to really go in there and start hammering out details. And I think the details that transportation professionals can insert themselves into is if they're having staggered days, transportation needs to be a driver on establishing those bell times. They will know best on how to reutilize the buses over and over, coming and going, to pick kids up and to take kids home, and to also stagger the tiers so that you can pick up multiple loads of students in the morning at a reduced rate, and take home multiple loads of students in the midday, then pick them up again, going in for the afternoon, and then home again. So making sure that, we talked about this earlier, transportation has to have a voice in this. And the whole mentality of how this plays out in terms of how transportation can support the district right now, it's really important. It always comes down to how does utilizing transportation, how do we keep kids healthy, and how do we keep our drivers healthy? With two of my clients, for example, 40% of the driving population, in one particular example, 40% of the driving population of their driving pool is in the vulnerable population. So there needs to be some really good protections for those drivers, because we don't want people getting sick. And, when it goes from that health and welfare piece first, and then other people in the district are looking directly at liability. And I'm pretty convinced that unless student transportation administrators and forward-thinking innovators can come up with ways to reutilize transportation to help in whatever way it can, there's been conversations about the liability's too great, park the buses. We're not ready for yet. And so the overall pendulum is swinging so far one way to the other. I would just be open and honest with your district and school administrators. Tell them what your constraints are. Don't tell people no. Tell them what you can do. And if it pushes you beyond the limits that exist, be okay with not knowing, and be okay with getting back to people, and be okay with something not working out okay. That's all right. This is all new for us. And I'd also encourage you, pick up the phone and call an expert, call somebody that can help you. That's just as equally important. You equipping yourself and educating yourself to be able to bring that back to your system, that's what people are relying on you for as the transportation expert in your district.
Okay. And I was mentioning the article that you're writing for us, and I want to now kind of segue and hit on this. So you're talking about how technology is evolving amid this entire COVID-19 situation. And we see a lot of evolution across our society, and certainly this industry is no different. But you're talking about how you're seeing a transition from tracking students on and off the bus to tracing them, and it comes back to this whole entire health of the school, and how the school bus and transportation assets can play a part in that. But when you're talking about tracing, and I want you to get into that, explain what that is to our listeners. But there's some concerns with that. There's some civil liberty issues. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. When the subject of tracking students first came about several years ago, there were some states who said, whoa, this is a violation of civil liberties. We're not tracking anybody. That has evolved slowly as society has, become more aligned with the fact that there are some good safety. I guess you could say it's comforting to know that your kid got on bus number 18 this morning, and then he got off at the school, and so he scanned himself or she off and on the bus properly, and the child's gotten to school. You also know on the way home when they leave the school and when they get dropped off by the bus. And now some of the technology includes when the bus is coming. So that's the tracking piece of it. And the conversation is turning into tracing. So where that comes in is you have to have the infrastructure and the technology already adopted in your system for tracking, for tracing to be effective. So you have to have data, accurate data of students that ride your bus. You have to have a system that logs them in and out. And educators and public health professionals are talking about tracing from the standpoint of, if there is an outbreak, if there is something going on in a particular system, school campus, they want to know, they want to backward track everywhere that particular person has been and who they may have had contact with. And that's where, if you already have some of this infrastructure in your school system, where you have GPS on your fleet, where you have student attendance nailed down on your buses, where you have accurate rosters, and your student information and your routing system are tied together. All of those things bring this big picture together to be able to just turn over data that says, yeah, student A got on bus number 25 and they rode with these other kids who also scanned on the bus. So yes, there's still very much so concerns about parents having their students' information given away. Rightfully so. It's new. I don't have an opinion on it one way or the other. I'm just sharing with you things that I've heard and kind of how the system works. But there's legislation moving forward right now, and all of this COVID-19 response, that they're already looking at utilizing our cell phones for this kind of tracing, and it's all being done in the under the venue of public health and safety.
Gotcha. Well, thanks so much, Ryan. It's always great to talk to you and hear your thoughts and what you're seeing on the ground there at districts. I want to remind all you listeners out there that more from Ryan will be coming out in our blog and as well in a column in our June issue. And for those of you who are planning on going to STN Expo Reno, yes, at this point, we're still trying to push ahead and have that event. Ryan will be part of our team with the Transportation Director Summit. So please go to stnexpo.com/west and you can get all the information on what you need to do to apply for that event. And we'll see you there, Ryan. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Well, friends, that's a wrap. Make sure you subscribe to School Transportation Nation on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And be sure to share it with your friends and leave a review. And thanks again to TransFinder for sponsoring today's podcast, and of course to our expert Ryan Hahn. Be sure to visit stnonline.com to read his blog and for our continuing coronavirus coverage.